starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, 3 very important points of characterization. Firstly, what are poverty reduction initiatives? How do they look like on our world compared to theirs? And why essentially do they do more harm than good when you compare them at a global versus a local level, right? So firstly, how are poverty reduction initiatives looking like? We think these are just programs that are taken into account in order to alleviate poverty, right? But not just alleviating poverty, but through education, housing programs, tax reductions, and actually being able to fuel economic growth. The key message here is that these poverty reduction initiatives are actually being done at a base level in developing countries. The main reason why is because poverty is inherently experienced at an absolute best in developing countries. And you need to understand that there are two kinds of poverty, right? Firstly, we have the absolute poverty. When we talk about absolute poverty, this looks like people living under $1.50, right? Compared to relative poverty, where people are unable to just access basic needs. Because there's a distinction between absolute and relative poverty, we think then when we have global initiatives to reduce these poverties, to reduce poverty in of itself, we essentially have a benefit, right? So then how does it look like on proposition side of the world, right? We think when we have a global poverty reduction strategy, we're talking about worldwide networks, worldwide programs, and international bodies and agencies being able to, number one, pump in a lot of money, have a lot of resources, and actually be able to hold themselves accountable as to how these funds are going to be used, how they're going to be used in countries, how housing programs are going to be done, and how much accessibility and representation we do have, right? But even secondly, we think their house looks like having the local and national government being able to tap in the domestic economy and being able to look for strategies and solutions to alleviate poverty on a local level. Notice then on their side of the house, they do not have any kind of incentive structure to move away from their local boundaries and actually be able to tap into external or international level markets, right? But before I move on, I'll take a POI if you have any. The metric that we're going to weigh this debate on is on efficiency. Why then, when you do a comparative of global versus a local poverty reduction initiative, which is going to be much more efficient, right? Understand that the outcome both houses need to reach is that we need to at least reduce poverty, even if we're not able to alleviate it all of it in of itself, right? So firstly, we think on our side, when you have a global poverty reduction strategy, we have a collective responsibility to reduce this poverty, right? How does this look like? We think then we're able to create an incentive structure to better society, because we do have globalization, we have international trade, we do have reduced barriers to trade. But not only that, we have better educational accessibility and representation, not only on the local but also at international level, right? But even before I move on, yes, shoot.
Since you said that we already have organizations that do that, why is there still poverty in developing countries?
You need to understand, like I said, the outcome is not to eliminate poverty at 100%. Even if we get a 0.01% reduced margin of poverty, we think that is still a better outcome because you're able to tackle each and all the countries across the continent, right? You need to prove to us that at the end of the day, at a local level, how then do you alleviate poverty, not only on a national level, but also on a global scale? Because we think poverty, like I told you, is varied in 2 degrees where you have absolute and relative poverty, right? But even we think on our side of the house, we get a better resource mobilization. Understand, in order to reduce poverty, even at its minimum point, you need to pump in money in order to allow these people to access better education, to get better housing access, to have these tax breaks, to have better employment opportunities, right? This is only going to be done when you have funds, when you do have resources coming in and being pumped in through World Bank, through the IMF, and through other UN international organizations, right? You need to understand then, on our side, the benefit is that when we do have these funds, because it's at a global level, you have better accountability. Comparatively then, why do you not get accountability on their side of the house, and why do we care for it more, right? We think at a local level, you need to understand, poverty in of itself is experienced in developing countries. Developing countries do have developing democracies. Because you have developing democracies, you inherently have political instability. That means any little thing can literally create a lot of chaos. And because of that, even if you've got the money, at the end of the day, you will not be able to reduce any kind of poverty, even if it's that 1%, right? But even secondly, we think, despite them having a social contract and that responsibility, and you even having the funds from a national level, because we think think you still are able to access the same resources that we have. We just think you won't have accountability. So you need to prove to us why then your social contract is so strong and why you still get that transparency. Comparatively, on our side, when you have an international organization and you have these watchdogs to actually look and oversee these kind of money transfer and resource mobilization and management, we think at the end of the day, you still have better accountability, which is important for alleviating poverty. Thank you.
In Kenya, the poverty rate is at 33.5%. That means 33.5% live under the poverty line, which lies at around 3,000 to 6,000 Kenya shillings per month. For humanity to focus on other problems we face today, like climate change or health crises, we have to first become financially stable. Without a foundation of living, we need certain things to form a foundation for us to then move away from and then focus on other problems, right? Yeah, today we try to combat this poverty with poverty reduction initiatives. There are two types, global versus local, and this is what this motion is about. I am on the opposing side, your first speaker. I will focus on the aspect of context. Local initiatives having more context about the problem, how the poverty came to this stage where it harms people and it keeps people prisoner in this area. I will start with the definition. Mostly we agree with the definitions. However, I would like to add that a poverty reduction initiative tries to reduce poverty permanently, that it's not a contemporary solution, that it should be permanent. That is the goal of poverty reduction initiative. We ask for a cooperation between local and international poverty reduction initiatives, but with local initiatives leading the way. First speaker mentioned education, that this should be international and that this should form a base for them to then move outside of this poverty, keeping them trapped. We think this might not fit to this to the situation. International education is quite advanced and is often not very fitting, appropriate for the people that live there. We have to take culture, the resources and the information, I will take them in a minute from now, into accountability. You mentioned resource mobility as well. I agree, international initiatives mostly have more resources and a bigger budget, but they always have this for a limited time. Projects are never long-term, they're always 2 to 3 years. There's no real motivation, no real drive, because they have no association to this area. The UN, IMF or Oxfam projects don't go on forever. The school is built and 2 years later they're out. There's no keeping the school alive. They just give it on, pass it on to the people that live there and often don't know how to use these resources and infrastructure they're given. And this goes back, it's not the point of a global poverty reduction initiative that tries to combat poverty permanently. I take your POI, Rina.
Okay, so you said things like education wouldn't transfer to developing countries because there's kind of a different standard of education.
Exactly.
Then how does the speaker respond to the fact that there's international schools in developing countries where students are actually able to accommodate all of us at what an international school? How are we able to do that in a developing country?
We have international schools mostly in the capital where poverty does not play such a big role. If you go up to Turkana, we have where poverty really hits. It might not be appropriate to have a school like that with international staff that do not have any bond with the people that live there. We need local people that know how to teach local things in the local language. It has to be in relation to the people that live there, and we think an international body cannot give these resources. As I said, let me come to my first argument, or touch it at least. More context. Local initiatives know the problem better. If this is lack of clean water, nutritious food, inequality, basic infrastructure, lack of governmental support. These are all causes of poverty. They can thus come up with a poverty reduction method to combat this specific problem. And a global initiative cannot do this because they have no inside knowledge of the problem and its causes. They know the preconditions better as well. Local initiatives often can contact these poor areas as they're based nearby or live there. Volunteers often come from this area and know the inside knowledge. Therefore, they're more trustworthy as the information comes from the people inside of these communities. Yeah, we know how to access the terrain and area. We don't waste resources. We know how to approach this area, and therefore we can do something there. I will finish off my speech, but I think context is a very big argument here.
3, 2, 1. So the opposition's case operates on one key assumption, and that's the assumption that international organizations don't know economics, don't know basic economics to be able to incite economic change in developing countries and countries that are stricken with poverty. And in my speech, I'm going to get into why that is wrong and continue to emphasize the fact that it's more important for us to prioritize international organizations as taking care of this. So to move on to my rebuttals on why these organizations would have more, would still have sufficient knowledge in able to manage this. That's not something that's exclusive to that side. It's not impossible for an international organization to gain information. Because one thing is that economics is generally central. It's generally similar among countries. Developing countries have faced poverty before and have managed to eradicate such poverty. We can argue and flip that argument to say that developing countries, sure, they know the poverty that's going on, but they don't have experience solving the problem because the problem still exists. But in international countries and in developing countries, they one, have experience facing poverty in their own nations, and two, have had experience alleviating said poverty very successfully, which is why it's even more beneficial to have them. I'll take that point to the third minute. They have more experience alleviating said poverty, which is more valuable, and I'll get into that in my next point. So even with their case, fundamentally, it's flawed because it operates under the assumption that these international organizations cannot get said information, cannot relate to said people. They made certain points about, being able to teach in certain languages. The motion isn't talking about having teachers come from one country to teach. This motion isn't about education. It's about having it's about having them take over poverty reduction initiatives. This means that they're the ones who are going to be managing resources. This means that they're going to be the ones making decisions. So it's of very little relevance when you come to tell us that they're not going to understand the language that people are teaching, because now we're focusing more so on the economic side of things. How is this managed? So even if we take you at your best case and say that people can't teach in that language, we can always hire teachers from a local country with the resources that you even considered. We have more of an upside. So with that, I'll get into my substantive argument, which ties into my rebuttals when I said that poverty is even worse in developing countries. So because developing countries primarily face poverty, our first speaker characterized for you that there's more corruption in poverty-stricken countries. Even in Kenya, there's a lot of corruption. There's a whole Supreme Court case going on because of suspected corruption in the election. One thing that is a really big harm is to have a corrupt government trying to manage where money is going. A lot of the times what happens is that, one, this money is stolen, it doesn't actually end up going to the people. So even if, let's say, you were to have sufficient resources on your side, we're making the point that even with those sufficient resources, it's not going to get to the person who needs it. And before I elaborate on that point, I'll take you here.
Could you please name such an international project that actually did create change and reduce poverty?
Okay, one other point of context is that this motion isn't defending status quo. You're the people defending status quo. So when we come here and tell you that we need these organizations to come out, that we need to start prioritizing them, we're advocating for changing status quo, which means that even if there does not exist such in this, currently, it's going to go. But that doesn't mean there aren't examples. We look at things like the World Food Program, which have been more effective than countries in actually alleviating world hunger. So even with that, then we know the examples where it's been done, and it's actually more effective. Another point on corruption is that our first speaker told you that there's more accountability with these international organizations. International organizations are very political spaces. They do very much care about what the image is to people who donate, to people who put them in those positions of power. That means that if they are giving money to our local government in order to create welfare schemes, then they're going to act as a sort of watchdog to make sure that that money gets to where it's supposed to be getting. The difference in the comparative is that on our side, you have an international external organization, the corrupt government, coming to hold these people accountable. But on their side, you don't have any such accountability because these local governments are corrupt. And if you don't have something external from that government controlled and accountable, then the money isn't really going to get where it's supposed to be. And another second point that I'm going to touch on is because when you alleviate this burden from developing countries, because we're already established under the status quo, they're not handling it as well as they could, because poverty still exists. Poverty is a really, really big problem. You give them more room to now focus on other things. If external and international organizations are now handling poverty, then you have them being able to do things like education. Maybe they could build more schools and have more of those local teachers you guys wanted. They could build roads, they could build those things. So when we're talking about having welfare schemes, giving people food, giving people money, alleviating their poverty, the government now has more freedom and more resources to allocate towards other things, because opposition has conceded that they don't have as much resources on us. It's very, very, very important for them freedom to mobilize those resources elsewhere where the country is efficient. So to summarize my case, I told you that we give you more accountability, we give you more freedom for the government to work with, and we still have knowledge of economics. Thank you.
So, as has been established by multiple speakers, poverty is a big issue that needs to be tackled in the world before it can move on to other problems, as it is a base level to be able to fight other problems and make the world a better place. Now, the debate here lies, of course, should this be international or local? Now, to quickly rebut some of the points made by the proposition speakers. So, one of the points that was brought up was the responsibility of international organizations on how they want to fight this problem and how they feel responsible for solving it. However, responsibility is a lot higher if you're fighting for your own country. You feel as though you're helping your own people escape poverty. You can see the change happening around you. And if the initiative isn't as successful, for UN or another global body, this is simply a failed project. However, for a citizen of a country, it is failing your people, watching poverty grow around you and not helping people escape the poverty cycle. Moreover, one of the speakers mentioned infrastructure, roads and schools being built. However, if we start a new global initiative, it can't tie in with the initiatives already in place. It can't cooperate with schools, for example, that are already in place and projects that are already being used. However, local governments have already made a start. I'll take your point of information in a minute. However, local governments have already made a start. They can continue going where they're going. They don't start from zero. Moreover, one of the speakers talked about the knowledge and how this knowledge could also be gained by international organizations. However, they may struggle to put this into a context as well as local governments may. They've not been reviewing this information and not been looking at it with the context of their country for many, many years, seeing the problem rise and seeing the factors that cause this and the effect that it had on the local population.
Okay, so could you then give us the logical links and actually thoroughly logically prove to us how it's impossible for international organizations to then gain this knowledge?
The issue isn't gaining the knowledge, it's the speed at which the knowledge is gained. In these countries, this knowledge already exists. They've been studying and researching it for many, many years. The international organizations are coming in right now. They don't have the context of living in this country, seeing it happen around you, but simply from a political view, which is not as varied, not as nuanced. Now, corruption was also mentioned, and corruption is actually also quite likely in these international organizations, as there's more money being moved from more people between different organizations, which with more and more people have the chance to be corrupt and sort of take their own cut or implement this money and these funds, resources in the wrong places. It was also mentioned that these people cared about their image and how this was sort of a reason for them to make sure that the money is allocated correctly and that basically everything goes through well. However, keeping a good image shouldn't be the main motivation. The main motivation should be reducing poverty in these poverty-stricken areas. And again, the local governments and local projects have a way higher motivation to do this. They do not care about how they're viewed, they care about reducing poverty, which is what we both should be fighting about. Now, moving into my own arguments. So, international governments and their effects are a lot less meaningful if they're not supported by local government, not fighting in the same way or in the same direction as brought upon by the local government. So the main point here is that the local government already has the trust of their people, not only in the capitals and the areas surrounding the capital, but in the rural areas, in the areas that are more poverty-stricken, in the areas which need more help. There's more trust in the government, and international bodies may not even be known or have any relevance in these areas. Another point here is communication. Communication in local languages with local customs, local traditions, tradition and religion. It can help them be at a base level with the people and help them communicate at a level which we all can agree on is the best way to solve this issue. Another point is that global poverty can't be fought all in one point. Countries are different stages of the fight. Different things need to be done for these countries, and different things are already in place. The countries are at different spots. So now, if we start by simply applying the same way to every single country, there'll be overlapping and underlapping. What I mean by this is that there are things that are being done that are unnecessary and things that need to be done that aren't done. The last point I'll be getting into today is the responsibility and motivation of these countries. They're fighting for their own nation, their own people, the people that they see around them every day, possibly being in poverty, and maybe, with their help, being able to escape this poverty. Also, these local governments and local initiatives have their own people as their #1 priority. To an international body, like the UN, for example, this is simply one project in one country. For the local people, it is their country and their people, and it is their #1 priority to protect these people. They can also associate more to the country. They can relate to the issues within the country, know what is going wrong, know what is going correctly, and sort of know what is going on in these areas, and especially their access to rural areas, which international bodies do not have. Again, also partly due to infrastructure that is already in place by the government. The determination of these, that's all for today. Thank you.
Panel, I think this debate boils down to sort of the macro versus the micro impact, right? The overall goal both sides can concede is to reduce poverty, but again, both sides I think can concede that poverty is a global issue. My first speaker came and told you that poverty essentially can be broken up into 2 areas, and I think side opposition needs to remember that, right? And I think it's important when analyzing this debate. Side prop thinks that the clashes of this debate boil down into 2 main areas. Firstly, the issue of accountability, and secondly, the issue of efficiency or resource mobilization, and which side is better able to kind of alleviate poverty or try to solve it in the best way that they can, right? So on the issue of resource mobilization, we tell you one major thing, and which is that we are able to get greater resource mobilization because of the fact that it's an international sort of initiative, and because of this, we're able to pull in more funds, we're able to pull in more resources. We get no kind of engagement on that point, on this idea of pulling in resources. And again, on their side of the house, they don't again tell us how they're able to mobilize these resources to be able to solve the issue on a local level. But we still take them on their best case, right? They come in and tell us that the resource mobilization on our side of the world is short-term. We think this is a symmetrical issue. You can argue on their side of the world that the UN may fund a project, may last for 2 years. You can argue on our side of the world that the government may put in a project and they're re-elected the next 5 years. We think this issue of a short term is available on both sides of the world in the worst case scenario, right? What we're able to get on our side of the world exclusively and not on theirs is the issue of accountability and this resource of mobilization, which we think is greater and which we think they haven't shut down up until this point in the debate, right? So we think on the clash of resource mobilization, we win just based on the fact that our points are still standing. And again, we don't see the kind of solid mechanization on how they're able to actually efficiently garner resources on their side. Secondly, on this issue of efficiency, right, they tell us that the metric of kind of efficiency is the issue of the social contract, right? The government is able to have the knowledge to be able to approach this poverty-stricken areas with, kind of the local knowledge and that sort of idea, right? The thing is, we've kind of responded to this and told you, look, even the global initiatives, UNEP, or all of these people, they were founded or they were created to solve these local issues. But even if we ignore that point, we ignore that idea, we tell you, even if you have this knowledge, you know all the locals, they're all your best friends, it doesn't matter if you don't have the ability to actually solve the issues. They've not proven to us how they have this ability, and we think that's most important when we're in this debate, and we think ultimately it loses them on that clash. But even secondly, if we ignore all of that, they tell us that on our side of the world, the governments or the sort of international people are acting with selfish interests. We think, again, a symmetrical issue. You can argue that the governments act in selfish interest to pump up sort of their image. You can argue that the international bodies or countries may donate to pump up their image in the global side. A symmetrical issue again. What we're able to get on our side of the world, firstly, these international actors are many and kind of there are many actors in play. What we have exclusive on our side of the house, I said a flag for POIs, is the ability to have things such as watchdogs, the ability to have resource management, things that we don't see on their side of the house. But secondly, we ignore all of that. We take them for a point that they brought up, which is the fact that people have trust in the government, and they use this as justification for, upholding this sort of social construct point. What we've seen a lot of the times in these poverty-stricken countries is people actually not having trust in the government, and we think them resting their whole entire point on this severely harms their case, right? We see people who are living in poverty, and because the government is not able to combat this, we see no trust between the people and the government, and for them to run their whole case on this, I think it harms them significantly. What we're better able to get is accountability, but not only accountability, actual enforceable accountability. You're able to act, and we think that's really important, right? And even if we ignore all of that, right, the main point and the main idea that they tell us is this idea of context and this idea of knowledge. We prove to you, one, why that's available on both sides of the house, but even secondly, if we ignore all of that, why it's not important when looking at this from a grand scale. We've had this idea of this sort of point lying in the debate about education and teachers. We don't think that's important in the sense that we're looking at who's better able to reduce this idea of poverty. Even if it's by 0.01%, we think we're able to get that 0.01% a lot better than their side of the house is. And because of that, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
I'm your reply speaker for today. I'll start with depicting a few clashes, the main clashes of this debate, and then I'll try and paint you a picture. The first clash we had was material and resource mobility as a pro-argument on the government side. These global poverty reduction initiatives have higher budget, they have more to work with, bigger donors, and can achieve more. They apparently have a higher impact. We combated this with waste and duration. It's not a long-term project, they're always short-term, and it's a waste of resources. Short-term projects, they think they help, but eventually after this duration they fall back, and this fall is more demoralizing than a project with little funds that just helps them up step by step. We think this huge step and then a great fall is very harmful for the local society. We also said that these global poverty reduction initiatives, they're dependent of their donors, right? They give them money, this is what they have to work with. So they also have to show something back. This is the reason why they have short-term projects, because they want to show their donors, this is what we have achieved in 2 years, and then they're out. And now we come to my next point, motivation. As we said, they try to keep a good picture for themselves, these global poverty reduction initiatives, for the foreigners that give them their money. They have the feeling they need to help, and they need to show the world that they're helping instead of focusing on their own problems. An example was given by our third speaker. The motivation on the side of opposition, however, is to help their own people. It's my country, I want to help it to step up, I don't need the help of others. This means we have a higher drive, a higher work ethic, and therefore a more pleasant and permanent solution, which should be our goal. Let me paint you a picture. In a world where we have local poverty reduction initiatives in every country should focus on itself, then we have a global poverty reduction. When we have local poverty reduction initiatives, we have people that know the ins and outs of the cause of poverty in their own country. They focus on themselves, they reflect, and then they can act. They know how to handle the problem, and they know what to work with and what not, because they know what's appropriate, what works for themselves. Therefore, we have people helping each other, better acceptance. I accept my friend helping me, my neighbor helping me, instead of some foreigner doing something on my property, basically. All we need is trust and money. This trust has to go to the local poverty reduction initiatives. The money that is being donated, I will round up my case. Local poverty reduction initiatives in every country means a global poverty reduction.
One, panel, I'll reiterate what I said in my first speech. Understand that poverty is a global phenomenon. That means even if they come and strawman our case and tell us that, look, we've been bidding between developing and developed countries, you need to understand one country is suffering from absolute poverty, one is suffering from relative poverty. That is the distinction, and that was the metric of our whole case, right? Understand that there are three main clashes in this debate and one core impact. The idea of efficiency, where the outcome is that even if you reduce 0.01% of poverty, we would take that over just living in poverty, right? So what do you get from opposition side of the house? They have two main arguments. They come and tell you first, number one, at a local level, it's so much better to reduce poverty because of trust, because of social contract, and thirdly, the idea that these people are, more transparent in some way because they already have the money, they already have welfare schemes. Understand that we respond to this very mechanistically, right? Firstly, we tell you the idea of incentive structure is not something that is exclusive on their side. Rather, it is a very symmetrical benefit you get on both sides of the house. We come and give you a few responses. Firstly, we tell you if the idea of political pressure is there at a local level and you already have a good impact, why is it then when you have political pressure at a global level, why then is it inherently so much worse, right? But even secondly, we tell you the idea of globalization and dependency means that because China wants to invest in the raw materials and tap into resources in Africa, it will do its best and have a better incentive structure to actually alleviate poverty in Africa. We think because that incentive structure exists, at the end of the day, you better alleviate poverty. You do not deal with that, right? But even thirdly, understand what Joy tells you. This debate becomes about a macro versus a micro impact. You only have micro level impacts and you actually concede to a whole case because we tell you when we have incentive structures, these are things that are symmetrical. We prove to you why we get it at a macro level. Second point of clash, you talk about the idea of accountability. You tell us, look, because we have a better local language, we have better transparency, and you have social contract. That is okay, take that. But then we come and tell you, because developing countries in of themselves are corrupt, they are fragile, they have weak political systems, because all these things exist in those developing countries, how then do you then alleviate poverty, even if you get a 1% reduction? No response whatsoever, right? But even secondly, we tell you, the idea of resources and pumping in finance and having management. We'll concede and tell you, even if the UN is coming to work for just 2 years, at the end of the day, in those 2 years, at least we're going to get better accessibility to education, we have better housing programs, we have tax breaks, we have all this kind of management of resources and tapping into the labor markets domestically. That is a better impact than anything you guys give us, right? But even secondly, we tell you that the idea of trust is going to again be symmetrical. We have it so much better because we already have an incentive structure that is profit motivated, that is economically and politically motivated. You do not give us any kind of mechanization to answer the very core question, right? How do you efficiently solve poverty even if it is a 1% reduction rate? Proud to propose.